Hey everyone, Bradley Stalder here. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. Today, I'm going to give you 4 under-the-radar stacks. And in best ball, stacking is king. It's become so popular in fantasy football. It's easy to see why. Pat Kerrane won $2 million last year, having stacked Tom Brady and Chris Godwin. He also stacked Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki and Raheem Mostert. And he stacked Daniel Jones, Wan'Dale Robinson, and squeezed in Saquon Barkley into that lineup. Another notable example is King Capital's team, which stacked A.J. Brown, Miles Sanders, and Jalen Hurts, and then also had a small side stack of Nico Collins and Davis Mills. So if you get your players' takes correctly and you've stacked them, fantasy managers, you can tap into high upside outcomes if you get those individual player takes right. So as you keep this strategy of stacking in mind, I want you to think about these 4 stacks. First, I want you to think about Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith. These are players who, even by themselves, are valuable. Jalen Hurts should be at the top of your priority list now that his ADP has fallen into the 3rd round. Even when he's not paired with his pass catchers, Hurts has been phenomenal for fantasy and in particular for best ball. He's posted top 5 performances at a over 50% rate last season. But he did so at a 30% rate in 2021. That is top 3 in rate. So we have seen time and again Jalen Hurts be a huge upside fantasy contributor just on his own. I don't mind drafting Jalen Hurts naked or by himself, but why not consider stacking him with Devonta Smith?
Has some time, going deep, got a man, Devonta Smith, he's got it!
First, Smith is less expensive than A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is getting drafted pretty comfortably in the 1st round, whereas Devonta Smith, he's fallen to the back end of the 2nd round. Sometimes he'll fall even into the 3rd round. The second reason is that Smith has been about the same as A.J. Brown in the last season in terms of top 5 rate. Brown hit a 12.4% rate of top 5 games. Devonta Smith, 9.5%. Smith finished the regular season on a high note and actually out-targeted A.J. Brown from weeks 10 onward. And from that week 10 onward, had 9 straight games of 8 or more targets. So not only does Smith have this potential for high upside, but he also has a very reliable floor, scoring at least 12.5 points in half PPR scoring in about half of his games, about 50% of his games. And look, both of these players are very good on their own, but the Hurts-Smith stack is unique.
Everyone's a winner.
According to data from Chad Maschke, this particular stack is the least among wide receiver tight end combinations in the first 4 rounds. Only 13% of the time is Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith getting stacked together. This is compared to Jalen Hurts stacked with A.J. Brown 30% of the time and Dallas Goedert 37% of the time. So it's very unique. Consider this advantage of selecting Devonta Smith in the 2nd round as opposed to drafting other pass catchers in the Philadelphia offense, which are being more often stacked with Jalen Hurts. I wanted to give you an early round stack, a mid-round stack, and 2 later round stacks to consider. This mid-round stack of Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk is one that I'm very much into. Trevor Lawrence impressed in 2022. He was quarterback 4 in terms of top 5 rate. He achieved a top 5 game at a 22.2% rate. And this placed him ahead of Joe Burrow, ahead of Justin Fields, and ahead of Lamar Jackson last season. So he's been in this mid-pack quarterback 1 conversation. But I've noticed over the past few weeks, Trevor Lawrence's ADP has been dropping. And I've seen in multiple drafts, and I've taken him in a couple places, where Trevor Lawrence was taken 12 or more spots after his ADP. That makes him more affordable and more enticing for stacking purposes. We've also seen Calvin Ridley's ADP increase. We've seen Christian Kirk's ADP increase each of the last 4 weeks. And look, Calvin Ridley is the presumed leader in fantasy points. That's where the market is anticipating based on his ADP. His ADP is a couple rounds ahead of Christian Kirk, but it's important to acknowledge what Christian Kirk was able to do last year. Kirk was able to achieve a top 5 wide receiver rate 6.4% of his games. And that was better than DeAndre Hopkins. It was better than DJ Moore. It was better than Drake London or Jerry Jeudy, all players going ahead of Christian Kirk right now. But even more so, Christian Kirk excelled in flex rate. He ranked wide receiver 10 in rate of games of scoring at least 12.5 points in half PPR scoring. And that was better than Devonta Adams. It was better than Keenan Allen, and it was better than Devonta Smith. And look, we don't expect Christian Kirk to replicate an exceptional 2022 season with Calvin Ridley in tow and with Evan Ingram returning. But the stack of Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk is pretty unique. It only occurs 22% of the time. There are only 3 other wide receivers, Devonta Smith, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Evans, that are stacked less frequently than Kirk in the first 6 rounds of your fantasy drafts. For reference, Trevor Lawrence is stacked 38% of the time with Calvin Ridley and 34% of the time with Evan Ingram. So only 22% for Christian Kirk is pretty low. Therefore, I think it's worth pivoting to Christian Kirk in these larger tournaments where he's not being stacked as much with Trevor Lawrence. It'll give a unique opportunity for you to get a stack, and especially given the opportunity that Christian Kirk has, the target shares that he's had. He's a fantasy point machine. He may not be able to get the upside that Calvin Ridley does, but we like Christian Kirk, and that stack can leverage potential upside of a promising duo. We still expect Christian Kirk to be a pretty good fantasy producer for 2023. Now I'll offer 2 late round stacks. The first late round stack is Mac Jones and Mike Gesicki. And no, Mac Jones is not like a super hot name for best ball, because out of Mac Jones's 31 career games, only once has he been able to exceed 23 fantasy points. For reference, Patrick Mahomes has scored 25 or more fantasy points in about 30% of his career games. Now, despite his lack of upside, historically, Mac Jones can be acquired in the 17th round of BBM4 drafts. And even more so, his ideal stack partner, Mike Gesicki, is available 1 round ahead. So it's an easy double tap in round 16 and 17. And while the case for Jones to take a step into a 10 to 12 to 15% top 5 rate is unlikely, Bill O'Brien taking over as the new offensive coordinator should give signs of optimism for us in the New England offense. The true focus, though, in this stack lies in Mike Gesicki, who runs a significant number of his routes as a wide receiver rather than a traditional tight end. And he has this big body profile as well. So he has the big body, he has a high average depth of target, he has the touchdown history. So all of that leads to significant fantasy scoring plays. It makes sense then in his career, Mike Gesicki has a 10.3% top 5 rate. That means he scored at least 14.2 points in half PPR scoring, more than a tenth of his games. This rate is better career-wise than Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Tyler Higbee, or Pat Freiermuth. And maybe you want an alternative to Mike Gesicki. Maybe you're out on Gesicki. Consider Hunter Henry instead as a very late stack, because Henry has a career top 5 rate of 5%. Hunter Henry is only drafted in 25% of Best Ball Mania 4 drafts. Most of the time, he is being undrafted. So keep these in mind for your late round New England tight ends stacking with Mac Jones. And these options shouldn't be overlooked as you are getting into the late rounds of your draft. Finally, the last late round stack here ties in an earlier wide receiver with a late quarterback. Ryan Tannehill and Trey Burks is a very interesting stack for me because the case for Burks is very simple. He's undoubtedly the best wide receiver for the Titans. And yes, he had his struggles. Like, he had an early preseason injury. He had subpar backup quarterback play. But Burks demonstrates brilliance in flashes during his rookie year. He finished 31st in target rate respectable. 31st in fantasy points per route run, respectable. 32nd in yards per route run, respectable. And it's worth noting that Burks managed to get his 2 flex games where he exceeded 12.5 points in half PPR twice. Both games with Ryan Tannehill in the second half of the season. Burks had recovered from an in-season turf toe injury. He had recovered from an off-season injury. He had recovered from the breathing issues he had in the off-season. So he had been spiking. He was on the right trajectory. And then week 13, he got knocked out due to a concussion in the Philadelphia game. He had a touchdown, a 25-yard touchdown in this game. The Titans were using him as a downfield threat. We saw this against the Packers. We saw this against the Eagles. It's not just that Burks was crushing. It's also that Ryan Tannehill was playing much better for fantasy purposes in 2022 when Burks was on the field. With Burks in the lineup, Ryan Tannehill averaged 37 more passing yards per game. He averaged half a touchdown more per game. He averaged almost 4 fantasy points more per game and was a mid-pack quarterback too when Burks was just playing the game. That is including the games where Treylon Burks left early. And so if you think about the splits with Ryan Tannehill and Treylon Burks, healthy Ryan Tannehill, this could be a very interesting stack to pay off because Treylon Burks is only being stacked 7% of the time. And that is the lowest among wide receivers and tight ends drafted in the first 12 rounds. Treylon Burks is being unstacked and drafted naked or by himself most of the time. This is probably due to the fact that many drafters are avoiding the Tennessee quarterback situation altogether, with Ryan Tannehill and rookie second-round pick Will Levis also on the roster. But Levis and Tannehill are only getting drafted a combined 20%. 80% of the drafts, they're not being drafted. So it's important to note that they're not being drafted, which makes, if you take Tannehill or Levis, maybe you're out on Tannehill, fine. Like, you can have your opinions on Tannehill, and you may be bullish on Levis. If you're a Levis guy, go for it. But you have to know that if you draft either Tannehill or Levis, you've already got a unique team. And then if you stacked Burks on top of that, that's even more unique among the wide receivers that are getting drafted where Burks is being drafted. But this is my final push for Ryan Tannehill. He has historically been able to access ceilings that are very interesting to us. He boasts a top 5 rate of 14% of the time over the last 3 seasons as the Tennessee starter. And that rate is better than Justin Fields, Jared Goff, Daniel Jones, or Matthew Stafford over that time. So with all of that evidence, Burks emerges as a very interesting stacking option given the scarcity of his stack rate in drafts with Tannehill or Will Levis. Leveraging this uniqueness could put you at an advantage in your fantasy drafts. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you check out my article on Player Profiler where I talk through each of these stacks. And I encourage you, make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at FFStalder. And I'll be continuing to pump out best ball content for you Tuesdays, 8 to 9 p.m. every week. Till next time, good luck in the best ball streets, everyone.